Welcome to the Bias Buzz, powered by Accuracy and Media. I'm Don Irvine, and I'm joined today by Spencer Irvine.
How's it going?
All right, the big news of the day, obviously, are the Super Tuesday results. Now that they're in, it's been quite a horse race up to this point in time, but now we're seeing some clear delineation of what's going on in the race. Trump had a big night last night, winning 7 of the 11 races. He now has been dominating the primary races so far, and is now leading in the delegate count by a decent margin. But we're not out of the woods yet, and he's not assured of the nomination yet. So when you look at the delegate math, and I took the CNN numbers this morning, we have CNN showing that Trump now has 315 delegates, Ted Cruz at 205, and Marco Rubio at 106. You need 1,237 delegates to win the nomination. So they're still a long way away from from winning the nomination. But now we're just starting to see how these things are starting to coalesce. And in 2 weeks, we do have a winner-take-all primary in Florida and in Ohio, and there are 165 delegates up for grabs there. So up to this point in time, we've been doing proportional delegates, and that's why we see how this has been going so far. And last night, Rubio really got hurt, I think, because he did not get the minimum standard threshold to get delegates in some of the states, so he fell further behind. I think, in general, my summation here really would be is that Trump definitely was the big winner. I think Cruz recovered, and the Marco momentum that you described last week, Spencer, seems to have dissipated.
Yeah, you could definitely say that. So the threshold you're talking about in the state of Texas was 20%. Rubio finished below that, so he didn't get any of the delegates from what I understand. Cruz did salvage, and he ended up getting Texas and Oklahoma, which is huge. Alaska was still up for grabs, although I think early this morning they did call it for him. I could be incorrect, but
Right, that's what I did see that, and some of the comments I've been seeing on social media regarding that too is just that, Trump had Sarah Palin out there for him, endorsing him, though I'm not sure she really campaigned for him specifically in Alaska. But it's, the optics, I think, are probably bad in that sense that, she went out there, endorsed Trump, and then can't deliver the state for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. But when you think about it, when do endorsements actually matter from politicians and celebrities? Because Marco Rubio has a lot of endorsements. Trump is starting to rack up endorsements, and Cruz doesn't really have as many as, say, Marco Rubio does from current U.S. senators. So it's really interesting to see how these endorsement races go, but in the end, Trump did make out pretty well. Although people thought it would be more of a landslide, it still was a dominant showing, but wasn't as, I think, bad as it could have been if you were anti-Trump. Now, if you're for Trump, you're like, oh, well, we barely underperformed, but we still did pretty well. While Marco Rubio was thinking, I really should have taken Virginia, and that was something that he was really banking on. He did get Minnesota, but he needed at least one more state to at least, put his hat on and say, hey, I got more than one victory this time. But now, he only has Minnesota.
Right, and this is part of Rubio's problem right now, is that at least he did win Minnesota, so he can say that he has one victory under his belt. But it still strengthens Cruz's argument in the sense of, I'm the guy who can beat Trump. He's done that now 4 times, even though Trump still has a wide advantage in terms of wins and losses over Cruz. The momentum clearly seems to be with Cruz over Rubio in this regard, and I think we're just going to see, more of this going forward. Now, Rubio's got his home state coming up. There are 99 delegates at stake. He could be in trouble there. If he doesn't win that, in 2 weeks, he's done.
Yeah, Marco is probably done if he doesn't take Florida, but you also have to take the long view. So I'm not a big fan of Nate Silver's politics. He's pretty liberal, worked at the New York Times with 538 blog, do a lot of statistical analysis. But I've been following his Super Tuesday coverage, and it's really interesting. He said that Cruz is really banking on evangelical white voters, but they haven't exactly come out in droves for him. I mean, he did win Texas and Oklahoma. That's great. But the odds are stacked against him as far as winning that same type of electorate going forward in these states, which are winner-take-all. It seemed that his plan was, we will go all in on the white evangelical vote to start, and we will overwhelm everyone else. now that Trump took most of that thunder away, I'm not really sure if Cruz will be able to carry the momentum. I mean, he has good momentum heading into there, but Rubio's strategy seems to be, especially after New Hampshire, that he will defer and wait for these winner-take-all states and pretty much win that way, be a late riser in the primary. And also note that Jeb Bush's former donors are planning to go with him over Cruz. They do not like Cruz. And then I think I did see some news that a lot more anti-Trump Republican donors are actually thinking of banding together, raising money in order to run ads against Trump from here on out. So those are future developments we need to keep in mind in kind of the trends that could happen in this election season.
Right, and these primaries that took place yesterday, you would have thought, under normal circumstances, someone like Cruz should have been able to sweep most of those. This was in his home base area in general, and he did win his home state. He did win Oklahoma, but Trump coming in there and being able to take some of those, I guess, SEC states, as they've been referred to, is kind of remarkable. One of the things that really struck me about this too is that the Trump effect on this election has been phenomenal. We saw record turnout for this kind of a primary, virtually in all the states. So the numbers just jumped incredibly. Normally people don't care that much in a presidential primary, and we've been seeing that in the past. But this time around, it's a different story.
Yeah, I heard stories of people in Northern Virginia getting calls from Marco Rubio, his campaign saying, "Hey, we're a couple votes short in this specific precinct. We'd really appreciate if you go and vote for us." People were in line by, I think the polls closed at 7 p.m. Eastern in Virginia. If you were in line, you still had the right to vote. And according to some people that I saw on Twitter that were retweeted, there were lines that lasted at least an hour or two past that. So it looked like the turnout was absolutely phenomenal from a Republican standpoint. Plus, I think a couple precincts in Arlington and Alexandria in Northern Virginia, they actually ran out of pre-printed Republican ballots. I mean, that is rather telling that, this race is really important. The turnout is really going far and beyond what we could have predicted.
Right, and I'm not quite sure yet what to make of some of these races or some of the primaries, because in some of the states they were open primaries, which meant that anyone can really vote, and so people could cross over, and there could be shenanigans going on in there, though I don't necessarily want to accuse anybody of that at this point. But I think when you have an open primary state, I'm not quite sure what the value is or how much you can discern in terms of did the winning candidate, do they really have what it takes, coming towards the general election, et cetera. For me, it's a lot easier for me to see something where you have a close primary. You have Republicans voting Republicans. You have Democrats voting for Democrats. In this kind of situation, in this time when you're crossing over, I haven't looked at the results yet. Everything is obviously just fresh. So we'll do a little more analysis later on to see how that fleshed out. But I'd be interested to see what kind of crossover we got yesterday.
Yeah, from just the exit polls and whatnot, it looked like there was a lot of former Democrats and independents voting in the Republican open primaries. So I think that may have been a concern in Virginia. But when you get to more red states, you saw Cruz heading off against Rubio, and then Trump was behind them. So I think that kind of proves your point. But obviously the data still has to come out and be dissected and disseminated, so we'll definitely take a look at that later.
Yeah, and one more thing about the election here before we move on is just that as a result of Trump's entry into the race, we're seeing reports of registration. Democrats are switching their registration to the Republican side in pretty large numbers. I think one of the cases was up in Massachusetts, for example, and that's a pretty liberal state, though they are very independent-minded in a lot of ways that they register to vote up there. But at the same point in time, I kind of think that even though you get these waves of people, changing party affiliation, I don't see this as a comparison to, say, the Reagan Democrats, that helped Reagan, back in 1980. I do think that this is the other part of the problem here is just that Trump may be attracting these people to switch party affiliation and allegiance, but from what I'm seeing from friends on social media and others is that he's also driving some of the core constituency of the Republican Party, the conservatives and others, away to the point where they're saying, if it comes down to Trump versus Clinton, I'm either going to write in a Cruz or a Rubio, or I'm not going to vote at all. Well, that's not going to help the Republicans at all.
No, and if you're on social media, this past weekend they did have the hashtag trending Never Trump. So mostly the Cruz and Rubio backers were using that, but a lot of them made some very interesting points about who they would actually vote for. I mean, even there was a Federalist article talking about this. One person said he would rather vote for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump, and this guy's a conservative. So it's just one of those things. It's a crazy season.
Yeah, we're seeing more of that, and it tends to disturb me a little bit. All right, time to move on here. We're going to talk a little bit, just a couple minutes here, about Hillary Clinton and her Wall Street speech transcripts. She's kind of been a little bit all over the board on this, kind of hemmed and hawed. But I thought it was interesting that last week the New York Times, of all things, who has endorsed, the paper which has endorsed Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination, issued an editorial and called on her to release those transcripts. And I think that's a real telling thing when the liberal media, especially when a newspaper that has endorsed the candidate comes out and says, you need to release these transcripts. And you know, she preaches transparency but isn't being transparent.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Clintons at work again. They say one thing and they completely do the other. Whenever you do see her in interviews, they ask her a tough question about her private emails, especially about these Goldman Sachs speeches, these really rich, posh firms down on Wall Street in New York City, and she completely ignores them. She laughs. Her laugh is quite disturbing sometimes. And she doesn't really answer the question. I mean, one time they asked after one of the Democratic debates, she said, well, why not? You know, I won't release them until everyone else releases their own private transcripts, which is dodging the question. She never answers or rarely answers these questions accurately.
Yeah, and there are several problems, I think, you know, with the way that she's answered these questions and the reaction that we're getting from the liberal side. It wasn't just the New York Times. What the New York Times did really kind of came right after Ron Fournier of the National Journal had basically said on Morning Joe that, you know, what is she hiding in essence? You know, she's not being honest, not telling the truth. Al Hunt of Bloomberg View said, you know, $675,000 that she got from Goldman Sachs, that's a lot of money. She didn't need the money. She talks about how she's defending the little guy and she excoriated Wall Street. Well, if she really has nothing to hide, if there's nothing inconsistent in what she said in her speeches and what she's been saying publicly in this idea that she's been bashing Wall Street to kind of line up with Bernie Sanders, then release the transcripts. You know, otherwise you do look like you're not telling the truth. You do look like you're hiding something, and that could come back to bite her.
Yeah, and she had several speeches. It's not just one. I think it was, 2 or 3. It could have been up to 6. But she hasn't released that information. So a lot of secrecy, a lot of smoke and mirrors, and you know that's the reason why the millennial vote is actually not going her way, because some of these millennials love to rail on Wall Street and they don't trust her, which is why they're going for Bernie Sanders.
Right, and to her point about, you know, when the Republicans do it, I'll do it, which is different than when she first said, I'll look into it. Which gave people hope, or at least the idea that she was probably going to release these transcripts. The thing is that for, say, Rubio and Cruz, as senators, they can't give paid speeches anyway, so they won't have anything on the record unless it was something beforehand. But who knew who Cruz or, you know, Rubio were before they got elected to office? Why would Wall Street want to have them up there? I don't know if John Kasich had given a speech, but I'm sure if he had, he'd probably be willing to do it. You know, it's a kind of a specious argument to say, well, when the Republicans do it, I'll do it. When you learn that the Republicans probably haven't done it, so there's nothing to release, so go release it.
Yeah, you know, it's all in the eye of the beholder, and she obviously thinks she's above the law, which also explains why the FBI is investigating her for her secret emails. So, and that's ongoing.
Right. All right, now we want to talk about Melissa HarrisPerry of MSNBC, or I will now say formerly of MSNBC.
She had a show? What?
Yeah, she had a show on Saturdays, and she got into a big brouhaha fight with the brass at MSNBC and decided that she was going to refuse to go on her show this past weekend. It had already been preempted a couple of weeks for other political news and other things that were going on over there. and she stood her ground, and now she's out of a job at MSNBC. And she's fired back a little bit, I guess, after that on social media, taking pot shots at MSNBC.
Yeah, I mean, her tweet, it was kind of weird. It was just it was a GIF, so a moving image of a woman lighting her car on fire and walking away. And first thing I thought when I saw that was, wow, you're really burning bridges. And, it just looks like she's going to focus on that academic job she has down at Wake Forest University. But it seems like a very odd way to go out. But then again, it could be to save face because her ratings were atrocious.
Yeah, and MSNBC has been moving in a different direction. I mean, they have realized that the liberal lean forward, motto that they had adopted, and where they had put Ed Schultz and Chris Matthews and Rachel Maddow, who was wearing a hard hat at one point, in commercials to promote this idea of they were going to be the progressive channel. That's pretty much going away now that they've been changing their programming, and Melissa HarrisPerry has been part of that programming. She's also been a race baiter on the program, and I think the network may have been deciding that under their new leadership and their new direction that this wasn't something they wanted to do. Anyone who can go out and say that, calling Darth Vader a racist, because he was this black guy, totally misconstrued everything. It was just one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard.
Yeah, plus her attack on the Romney family. I mean, that was completely uncalled for. But if you think about it, how many shows has MSNBC had to cancel, like compared to Fox News? So you have Melissa HarrisPerry's show. Joy Reid still have a show? I don't believe so.
Joy's gone.
Yeah.
Ronan Farrow's gone. Ed Schultz is gone. So they've been doing a revamp of things and trying to fix that. The end result, actually, if you look at the ratings, is that Fox News continues to dominate. CNN has regained its number 2 slot that it lost to MSNBC a few years ago, and MSNBC is recovering under the new programming, but they haven't come back to anywhere near the level they were before. But they were down in the dumps. At least if there's something positive to say about MSNBC, and this is probably one of the few times you'll ever hear me say anything positive about MSNBC, is just that I'm not seeing stories in the paper about their ratings hitting 8-year and 10-year lows anymore. So maybe that gives some solace to the brass at MSNBC.
Yeah, if anything else.
All right, tomorrow, well, today starts, CPAC started today with their boot camp activism things. This is the largest conservative gathering in the country, held every year, roughly about this time here in the D.C. area. And it will have all the presidential candidates that are still in the race will be speaking. And it promises to be quite an interesting event, especially with Trump speaking on Saturday.
Yeah, isn't Marco Rubio also speaking on Saturday?
Rubio will be speaking after Trump on Saturday. I think there's about a 3-hour gap between the two of them, which is probably a good idea.
Yeah, it's probably good. Scott Walker's going to reemerge again, former presidential candidate who withdrew last year. Yeah, it should be good. Hopefully they'll do a good job. Well, I heard last year the activist boot camps were actually very good, and there are a lot of interesting panels, and our sister organization's actually going to be sponsoring one of those too.
Right, we're going to be there. We're going to have Accuracy in Academia. We'll be doing a reception kind of event with the Conservative Book Club, Regnery Publishing, with author Stacey Dash. So I think that'll be a good thing. So if you listen to this or hear this before that event takes place, by all means come and join us. But I was looking over the panels, and there's a lot of interesting panels. But one that I thought was particularly interesting that maybe DNC Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz might want to think about peeking in on. If she doesn't come in person, maybe she can watch it on C-SPAN, and that is what is the difference between a socialist and a Democrat. So I think we're finally going to get down to the nub of this matter, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz could use a little bit of education on this.
Yeah, she definitely can't point out the difference or is too ashamed to do so on camera and on air.
All right, Spencer, can you talk about the Oscars a little bit here?
I'm not a huge Oscars fan, but I did watch Chris Rock's opening monologue, and it definitely made people uncomfortable. He did make a lot of race jokes. I mean, the theme was Oscars so white, so it was more of black representation at the Oscars ceremonies. And so he's the MC. He did, a solid job. He kept people, on their feet. But a lot of the times he was just poking fun at them. He was making fun of these Hollywood actors and their very exclusionary and anti-diversity award ceremony, which is kind of funny because Hollywood is very left and thinks they're very diverse and progressive.
You think that Chris, in this case, was trying to be an equal opportunity offender?
He was. I know I saw someone on Facebook was upset, and someone had written a post at the Huffington Post on, Chris Rock, your racist joke against Asians offends me. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, he offends everyone. He's a comedian.
Right, and then there were a lot of things going on there. Obviously, there'd been a lot of controversy at the Oscars this year about the lack of black actors being nominated for anything, but there, those things kind of happen in waves. I mean, it happens some years, maybe it doesn't happen other years. I didn't bring with me the study that I saw the other day, but someone had done a study, looking at a number of years of Oscar nominations, and found that over this period of time, that 12.5% of the nominations had gone to black actors, and they represented something like 13.2% of the population, which made it pretty statistically insignificant overall for that. So as a result of that, was there really a bias? Was there an inherent bias going on in there? I think the bigger problem with Hollywood is not really diversity as much as just this overt liberalism. Congratulations to Leonardo DiCaprio for finally winning an Oscar, but he did turn that into a big global warming screed.
Yeah, this whole climate change thing kind of gets old after a while, and that's his one big issue. I find it hypocritical when Hollywood actors ride on expensive chartered private planes, and then they lecture us about emissions. I think that is highly hypocritical.